What if the worst thing you ever did was also the kindest? Josephine Miller had spent 43 years serving coffee and kindness at Eddie's Diner in South Boston, watching families grow and couples grow old. She'd never broken a rule in her life, but on a gray November evening, when she saw the distinguished man in the corner booth, silver hair, expensive suit, eyes that had seen too much, lift that cup of coffee to his lips, something in her chest tightened like a fist. His bodyguard had stepped away. The kitchen door was still swinging, and Josephine had seen what the young cook had slipped into that cup when he thought no one was watching. Her hands were shaking as she crossed the diner floor. She'd raised 3 kids on tips and prayers. She knew danger when she saw it, but she also knew right from wrong. So she leaned close and whispered the words that would change everything. "He's poisoning you. Where are you watching from today?" The man's eyes snapped to hers, sharp as broken glass. For a moment, Josephine thought she'd made the worst mistake of her life. Vincent Castellano didn't get to be 68 years old in his line of work by trusting strangers. The diner went quiet around them, though the other customers didn't know why. They just felt the shift in the air, the way you feel a storm coming before the first drops fall. Vincent set the cup down slowly. His voice was barely a whisper. "Say that again." Josephine's mouth had gone dry, but she'd come this far. "The new cook, Jimmy's nephew. He put something in your coffee when your man went to make a phone call." Her voice cracked. "I've been watching people for 43 years, mister. I know when something's wrong." Vincent's face didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. He'd built an empire on reading people, on knowing when someone was lying and when they were terrified enough to tell the truth. This woman, with her worn hands and her kind face and her name tag that read Josie, was shaking like a leaf. But she wasn't lying. "Tony," Vincent said quietly, and his bodyguard was there in an instant, a mountain of a man with gentle eyes that didn't match his size. "Get the cook. Bring him to the back. Don't make a scene." Josephine stepped back, her heart hammering. She watched Tony move through the kitchen door with surprising grace for a big man. Through the small window, she could see the young cook, barely 25, with scared eyes and shaking hands, being led out the back entrance. Vincent hadn't moved. He was still looking at his coffee cup, like it might hold the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "You've worked here a long time," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. "Since I was 22, Josephine replied, twisting her apron in her hands. "My husband died when our youngest was still in diapers. Eddie gave me this job when nobody else would." Vincent nodded slowly. He'd lost his own wife 10 years ago to cancer. He remembered what it was like to rebuild a life from ashes. "Why'd you tell me? You don't know me." Josephine looked him straight in the eye then, and Vincent saw something there that surprised him. Not fear, but something deeper. Conviction. The kind his own mother used to have. "My mama taught me that every life matters. I don't care what you've done or who you are. Nobody deserves to die drinking a cup of coffee on a Tuesday night." The simple truth of it hit Vincent harder than he expected. In his world, people died for looking at someone wrong. They died for debts and disrespect and sometimes for no reason at all. But this woman, who probably made minimum wage and tired feet, had risked everything to save a stranger's life. She'd known who he was. Everyone in South Boston knew Vincent Castellano, and she'd warned him anyway. Tony returned through the back, his face grim. He leaned close to Vincent's ear and whispered something that made Vincent's jaw tighten. When Tony stepped back, Vincent looked at Josephine with something she couldn't quite read in his expression. "The boy says his uncle sent him, says I ruined his family 20 years ago." Vincent's voice was flat, but his hands had formed fists on the table. "Says his father went to prison because of me and killed himself there. Says I deserve to die the same way, slow and scared." Josephine felt her throat tighten. She thought of her own boys, how grief could twist them, how loss could make good people do terrible things. "What will you do to him?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. In the old days, the answer would have been simple and final, but he was tired. Tired of the violence, tired of the fear, tired of being the monster in other people's stories. He looked at this woman who'd shown him kindness, when she could have stayed silent and collected her tips and gone home safe. "I'm going to let him go," Vincent said finally, and Tony's eyes widened in surprise. With a warning. "Tell him if his uncle sent him. Then his uncle can answer for it. But the boy lives." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Vincent stood, buttoning his coat. He pulled out his wallet and placed $500 bills on the table. "For your honesty, and for reminding me that my mother didn't raise a monster, even if I've played one for too long." He turned to leave, then paused. "What's your full name?" "Josephine. Josephine Miller." Vincent nodded once, then walked toward the door with Tony following. But he stopped at the threshold and looked back at the woman who'd saved his life with a whisper. Something in his chest, something he thought had died with his wife, felt almost like hope. And he realized, standing there in a diner that smelled like coffee and old memories, that maybe there was still time to be a better man than the one he'd been. Josephine didn't see Vincent Castellano again for 3 weeks. She tried to forget about that November night, tried to pretend those $100 bills tucked in her sock drawer were from overtime, and not from a man whose name made grown men nervous. Life went back to normal. Morning shifts, lunch rushes, the familiar rhythm of coffee pots and small talk. Her daughter Sarah called every Sunday, worried about her mother working too hard. Her sons sent money when they could, though Josephine always sent it back. She'd raised them to stand on their own 2 feet. But the diner had changed. Jimmy was gone. Eddie had fired him the next morning when he'd heard what his nephew had tried to do. The new cook was a quiet woman named Rosa, who made the best pancakes Josephine had ever tasted, and sometimes, late at night when Josephine was wiping down tables, she'd catch herself looking at that corner booth and wondering if she'd done the right thing. Then, on a cold December morning when frost covered the windows like lace, Vincent walked back into Eddie's diner. He wasn't alone this time. A woman in her 30s was with him, pretty and polished, with Vincent's same sharp eyes softened by kindness. They slid into that same corner booth, and Josephine felt her heart do a strange little skip. She approached with her order pad, professional smile in place. "Coffee?" "Please," Vincent said, and there was something different about him. He looked lighter somehow, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying too long. "Josephine, this is my daughter, Maria." Maria extended her hand, and Josephine shook it, feeling the warmth of the younger woman's grip. "My father told me what you did. I wanted to meet you myself." Josephine felt her cheeks warm. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Maria said firmly, and her voice had steel in it, just like her father's. "Most people would have looked away. You saved my father's life." Vincent cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the sentiment. "We actually came here for a reason, Josephine." "May I call you that?" "Everyone calls me Josie," she said, sliding into the booth across from them without thinking. She never sat with customers, but something about these two made the normal rules feel unimportant. Vincent folded his hands on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how every life matters, about doing the right thing." He paused, and Josephine saw vulnerability in his face that probably few people ever witnessed. "I've lived a certain way for a long time, made decisions I'm not proud of, hurt people who maybe didn't deserve it." "Papa," Maria said softly, touching his arm. "No, let me finish." Vincent looked at Josephine directly. "My wife, before she died, she begged me to get out, to leave the business, to be the man she'd fallen in love with instead of the one I'd become. I told her I would, but I didn't. And then she was gone, and I told myself it was too late to change." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. She knew about loss, about promises made and broken, about the weight of regret. "It's never too late," she said quietly. "That's what Maria's been telling me," Vincent said with a small smile at his daughter. "And then you risked everything to save my life, and I thought, maybe the universe is giving me one more chance." Maria leaned forward. "We want to do something good, Josie. Something that matters. Papa's been setting things right with people he's wronged, paying back debts, apologizing where he can, but we want to do more. We want to open a community center," Vincent said. In my neighborhood where I grew up. A place for kids who don't have anywhere safe to go, who might end up making the same mistakes I did if someone doesn't give them a different path. Josephine's hand went to her chest. That's beautiful. We want you to run it, Maria said simply. The words hung in the air like snowflakes, delicate and impossible. Josephine stared at them both. What? You've spent 43 years taking care of people, Vincent said. You know how to see the good in others, even when they can't see it in themselves. You're exactly the kind of person who could make this work. Josephine's mind was racing. She thought of her aching feet, her small apartment, the bills that never quite got paid on time. She thought of her grandchildren and how she barely got to see them because she was always working. But she also thought of all those years serving coffee, watching people, knowing in her bones what they needed even when they didn't ask. I don't have any experience with that kind of thing, she said slowly. Neither do I, Vincent replied with a wry smile. But I'm learning that sometimes the best person for a job is the one who cares the most. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Maria pulled out a folder and opened it on the table. Inside were architectural drawings, budget projections, mission statements. We've already bought the building. We just need someone with vision and heart to bring it to life. Josephine looked at the drawings, at the spaces marked reading room, an art studio, and safe space for teens. She saw herself there, not serving coffee but serving hope. Not just watching lives pass by but helping shape them. But then a cold thought struck her. Vincent, people know who you are. What you've been, won't they distrust it? Absolutely, Vincent said bluntly. That's why we need you. You're clean. You're respected. You're the face people will believe in. Josephine felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. This wasn't just a new job. It was a new life. A chance to be part of something bigger than herself. But it also meant trusting a man whose world she didn't understand, stepping into unknown territory, risking the comfortable routine she'd built over 4 decades. Can I think about it? She whispered. Of course, Maria said warmly. Take all the time you need. But as Vincent and Maria left the diner that morning, Josephine stood at the window and watched them go, feeling something she hadn't felt in years stirring in her chest. It felt like possibility. It felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. It felt like the answer to a prayer she'd stopped praying long ago. Josephine spent the next week in a fog of indecision. She'd bring the folder home, spread the papers across her kitchen table, and stare at them until her eyes blurred. Sarah called midweek, and Josephine almost told her everything, but the words stuck in her throat. How do you explain to your daughter that a man from that world wants you to run his redemption project? The doubt crept in like winter cold through old windows. What did she know about running a community center? She was a waitress, a mother, a woman who'd survived by keeping her head down and her hands busy. This was too big, too complicated, too far outside her small, safe life. On Thursday night, she visited her oldest son Marcus at his house in Dorchester. He'd done well for himself, worked his way up from nothing to become a high school principal. His kids were doing homework at the kitchen table when Josephine arrived, and the sight of them made her chest ache with love and pride. Mama, you look tired, Marcus said, pouring her tea. Eddie working you too hard? No, baby, it's not that. Josephine wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Someone offered me a different job, a big job, and I don't know if I'm the right person for it. Marcus sat across from her, and she saw her late husband in his face. The same steady eyes, the same quiet strength. Tell me about it, so she did. She told him everything, leaving nothing out. The poisoned coffee, Vincent Castellano, the community center, the impossible choice. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember when I told you I wanted to be a principal? He finally said. You were still working double shifts at the diner. I was 35 years old and I said I was too old, too tired, that I'd missed my chance. Josephine remembered. I told you it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. And you were right. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Mama, You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself. To do something that's just for you, something that matters. But what if I fail? The words came out small and scared. Then you fail, Marcus said gently. But what if you don't? What if you're amazing at it? What if those kids need you the same way we needed you when Daddy died? That night, lying in bed in her small apartment, Josephine thought about fear and faith. She thought about how her mother had crossed an ocean with nothing but hope and determination. She thought about raising 3 children alone, never sure if she was doing it right. She thought about every hard choice, every scary leap, every moment when she'd been terrified, but did it anyway. The next morning, she called the number Maria had written at the bottom of the folder. When Vincent answered, she could hear the hope in his voice even before she spoke. "I'll do it," Josephine said. "I'll run your center, but I have conditions." "Name them," Vincent replied immediately. "I pick the staff, I make the decisions, and you never ever bring your old business near those kids. This center has to be clean, Vincent. Completely clean." There was a pause, and then Vincent's voice came back thick with emotion. "You have my word. And Josephine? Thank you. You're giving me a chance to be the man my wife always saw in me." 2 weeks later, Josephine stood in front of the building that would become the center. It was a beautiful old brownstone in Roxbury, scarred by time but full of potential. Maria stood beside her, and together they walked through the empty rooms, imagining what they would become. "We'll have after-school programs here," Maria said, pointing to a large room with tall windows, tutoring, arts, music, a safe place to just be kids. Josephine felt it then, the rightness of this choice settling into her bones. "We need books, lots of books, and computers, and we need to hire people from the neighborhood, people who understand these kids' lives." Have you ever faced a moment like this, where you had to choose between safety and purpose? Let us know in the comments. As they walked through the building, planning and dreaming, Vincent appeared in the doorway. He looked different now, softer somehow, more at peace. "Ladies, I have news. The Jimmy who sent his nephew to kill me, he's been arrested. Turns out he's been wanted for unrelated crimes for years. The police finally caught up with him." Josephine felt relief wash over her. "And his nephew? Working at my cousin's restaurant in Newton, getting a second chance just like I am." Vincent smiled, and it transformed his face. "We all deserve second chances, don't we? Some of us more than others," Josephine said gently, but she smiled back. Because she was learning that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And somehow, impossibly, she'd become part of Vincent Castellanos' journey toward something better. And maybe, just maybe, this was her journey too. The community center opened on a rainy Saturday in March, and despite the weather, people came. At first they were skeptical. Josephine could see it in their eyes. The wariness, the distrust. They knew Vincent's name, knew his reputation, but they also knew Josephine Miller, the woman who'd served their coffee for 40 years, who'd watched their children grow, who'd never broken a promise or told a lie. The first crisis came on opening day. A group of young men showed up at the door, and Josephine recognized them immediately. They worked for Dante Russo, one of Vincent's old rivals. The lead one, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, stepped forward with cold eyes. "This is Castellanos' place, right?" Josephine felt Maria tense beside her, but she stepped forward herself, small and 65 and absolutely unafraid. "This is everyone's place. You're welcome here, same as anyone else." The young man laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "You know what he's done? The people he's hurt? And now he thinks he can just open a center and everyone forgets?" "Nobody's forgetting anything," Josephine said quietly. "But we're also not going to let the past destroy the future. These kids deserve better than our old grudges." "Those kids deserve to know who they're dealing with," the young man shot back. Vincent appeared then from the back room, and the air went electric with tension. Tony was with him, positioned but not threatening. Vincent looked at the young men, and Josephine saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not anger or intimidation, but something close to humility. "You're right," Vincent said simply, and everyone froze. "I've done terrible things, hurt people who didn't deserve it, destroyed families. I can't undo that, and I won't insult you by pretending I can." He took a breath. "But I can try to do better now. This place isn't about me. It's about giving these kids opportunities I never had. If you want to come here, learn something, be part of something positive, you're welcome. If you can't trust that, I understand. But don't punish these kids for my sins." The young man stared at Vincent for a long moment. Josephine held her breath. Then, slowly, the tension seemed to drain from the room. The young man looked at his friends, then back at Vincent. "My little sister's been wanting to take art classes. Can she come here?" Vincent's face softened. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, free of charge. And if she needs supplies, we provide them." The young man nodded once, then turned and walked away with his group. But Josephine saw him stop at the door and look back, and there was something different in his eyes now. Something like possibility. The weeks that followed were challenging and beautiful in equal measure. Josephine threw herself into the center with the same dedication she'd given to raising her children. She hired teachers and counselors, most of them from the neighborhood. She created programs for kids who were struggling in school and for teenagers who just needed somewhere safe to exist. She organized community meals where families could come together, and slowly, gradually, trust began to grow. Vincent kept his word. He stayed in the background, providing resources but never interfering. Josephine watched him change, watched the hard edges soften, watched him begin to smile more easily. He'd come by sometimes just to sit in the corner and watch the kids, reading, playing, learning. And she'd see tears in his eyes that he'd wipe away when he thought no one was looking. Maria became Josephine's right hand, and the two women formed a bond that felt like family. They'd stay late into the evening, planning new programs, talking about their dreams for the center. Maria confessed one night that she'd always wanted to make her father proud without following his old path, and now she finally could. But the real transformation came from the kids themselves. Josephine watched a quiet 12-year-old named Latoya blossom in art class. Her paintings so beautiful they made Josephine's heart ache. She saw Marcus Jr., her grandson, volunteer as a tutor and discover his calling as a teacher. She witnessed teenagers who'd been written off by everyone else find purpose and pride in the center's youth leadership program. 6 months after opening, the center held its first graduation ceremony for kids who'd completed their programs. The room was packed with families, teachers, and community members. Josephine stood at the front, looking out at all those hopeful faces, and felt something break open in her chest. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. "When I was your age," she told the kids, "I thought my life was small. I thought I was just someone who served coffee and raised babies and kept her head down. But I learned something important. We're never too old to grow, never too far gone to change, never too small to matter. You've all shown me that this year. You've shown this whole neighborhood what's possible when we believe in second chances." Vincent stood at the back of the room, Tony beside him, both men with tears streaming down their faces. And Josephine realized that this was what redemption looked like. Not perfect, not painless, but real. It looked like a room full of kids who'd been given a chance. It looked like a community learning to heal. It looked like an old waitress and an old criminal finding purpose together in the messiest, most beautiful way possible. And it looked like hope. The center's 1-year anniversary fell on a crisp November evening, exactly 1 year after Josephine had whispered those fateful words in a diner booth. They held a celebration with music and food, and the building glowed with warmth and laughter. Sarah had driven in from Connecticut with her family, and all 3 of Josephine's children were there, proud of what their mother had built. Josephine stood on the front steps, watching people arrive, marveling at how much had changed. The skepticism had gradually transformed into support. The neighborhood had embraced the center as their own. Even Dante Russo had made a peace offering, donating computers for the learning lab. Old grudges weren't forgotten, but they were being set aside for something more important, the future. Vincent found her there as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He'd aged in the past year, but it was a good kind of aging, the kind that comes from finally sleeping peacefully at night. "I never thanked you properly," he said quietly, standing beside her. "You've thanked me 100 times," Josephine replied with a smile. "Not for this." Vincent gestured to the center, to all the life and hope inside it. "For believing I could be better than I was. My wife believed it, but she was my wife. She had to believe it. Maria believed it, but she's my daughter. You didn't have to believe anything. You could have let me drink that coffee and called it justice." Josephine turned to look at him fully. "You know what I've learned this year? That nobody's just one thing. You did terrible things, yes, but you're also a father who loves his daughter, a man who kept his word, a person trying to make amends. We're all complicated, Vincent, all of us carrying both darkness and light. Where did you learn to be so wise?" Vincent asked softly. 43 years of watching people, remembering that everyone's fighting battles we can't see. She touched his arm gently. "Besides, my mama always said the best measure of a person isn't what they've done. It's what they choose to do next." Inside, Maria was organizing the kids for a special performance they'd been practicing. A mixture of spoken word poetry, music and dance, all created by the youth themselves. Josephine and Vincent moved inside to watch, and as the lights dimmed and the first young person stepped forward to speak, Josephine felt tears slide down her cheeks. The girl at the microphone was LaToya, the shy 12-year-old who'd found her voice through art. But tonight she was sharing words instead of paintings, and her poem was about second chances, about how one person's kindness could change everything, about how hope was a muscle that got stronger the more you used it. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Josephine saw Vincent cover his face with his hands. Maria put her arm around her father's shoulders, and the three of them stood together like the family they'd become. Not by blood, but by choice and circumstance, and the shared belief that people could change. Later, after the celebration had wound down and the last families had headed home, Josephine sat in the center's kitchen with Vincent. Maria and Tony drinking tea and eating leftover cake. They were all exhausted but happy. The bone-deep contentment of people who'd worked hard for something meaningful. "I've been thinking about expanding," Maria said suddenly. "There are other neighborhoods that could use centers like this. Other communities that need safe spaces for their kids." Vincent looked at Josephine. "What do you think?" Josephine considered it, feeling the ache in her feet and the fullness in her heart. She thought about all the years at the diner, all the small kindnesses and quiet observations. She thought about how she'd almost said no to this opportunity, how fear had nearly kept her from the most purposeful year of her life. "I think," she said slowly, "that we start with one more center. We do it right. We learn from our mistakes here, and we build something sustainable. And then maybe, if we're lucky, we do another. One community at a time." Vincent smiled, and it reached all the way to his eyes. "One community at a time. I like that." As they sat together in that warm kitchen, Josephine thought about how life surprised you sometimes. How a single choice, to speak up, to take a risk, to believe in the possibility of redemption, could ripple outward in ways you never imagined. She'd saved Vincent's life with a whisper, and in return, he'd helped her find a purpose she hadn't known she was looking for. The center would continue to grow. More kids would find their voices, their talents, their hope. More families would discover they weren't alone, and Josephine would be there, not serving coffee anymore, but serving something even more essential, the belief that everyone deserves a chance to become their best self. As she locked up the center that night and walked to her car, Josephine looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about her husband who'd died too young, about her mother who'd crossed an ocean for a better life, about all the people who'd shaped her into the woman she'd become. They'd be proud, she thought, proud of the risks she'd taken, the lives she'd touched, the difference she'd made. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Your support means everything. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is whisper a truth when silence would be safer. Sometimes redemption looks like an old waitress and a reformed criminal building something beautiful from ashes. And sometimes, the most extraordinary chapters of our lives begin exactly when we think our story is already written. Josephine Miller had learned that it's never too late. Not to change, not to grow, not to matter. And as she drove home through the quiet streets of Boston, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow she'd return to the center, and the day after that, and the day after that, serving not coffee but hope, one person at a time. Thank you for joining us on this journey. May you always have the courage to whisper the truth when it matters most.